I think having a fake hearing like that and having it in the middle of this very important summit is really a terrible thing. He lied a lot, but it was very interesting because he didn't lie about one thing. He said no collusion with the Russian hoax.
President Trump reacting to the testimony of his former fixer and attorney, Michael Cohen, and questioning the timing of Wednesday's hearing on Capitol Hill. Cohen's appearance, seen by some as the first step in the Democratic plan to impeach the president. So would that be a smart strategy heading into 2020? Let's ask Wall Street Journal columnist Karl Rove. He's a former senior advisor to President George W. Bush. Welcome, Karl. Good to see you. What's your takeaway politically from the hearing this week?
Well, look, Cohen is not a very credible figure. The only time he really has credibility is when he says things that work to the advantage of the man that he called a con man and a racist. So when he said he was not aware of any Russian collusion, that was of benefit to President Trump. But if the Democrats pursue an impeachment strategy, unless there is a lot more that comes out from Mueller or a lot more that comes out from the Southern District than we think than is out there today or that we think is likely to come out, then Democrats can't go it alone. When a political party is seen pursuing impeachment on a partisan basis and not a bipartisan basis, it redounds to the disadvantage of the party that is pressing forward with it. We saw it happen to the Republicans in 1998 in the midterms. Democrats actually gained seats in the midterms as a counter-reaction to what the voters perceived as an overreach.
But what about the campaign finance point? I mean, if Donald Trump wrote a check to Michael Cohen to reimburse him for payoffs to these two women, then and the president has said publicly, well, I didn't have the affair and I had no role in the payoffs, and now you got a canceled check from the president personally. I mean, that looks really bad.
Well, it looks bad, but I'm not certain it necessarily is bad, because he could simply assert, I was doing this in order to protect my family, in order to keep this hidden from my wife, and in order to stop public embarrassment. Public and private embarrassment. I mean, we have candidates who pay their tax liens in the middle of a campaign. Is that a campaign expenditure because they've now paid their taxes?
No, but what about the issue of credibility, though? I mean, if the president lied to the public, I mean, you wouldn't have told President Bush, yeah, you better lie and cover that up.
No. Look, though, I thought the point that Dan Henninger made earlier was right. We didn't learn anything new about the president. Did we know that he's a cad? Did we know that he had these affairs? Did we know he was an unpleasant person? Sure, we already knew those things. What did Michael Cohen tell us that we already didn't know? We already knew that he had already reimbursed Michael Cohen for this. This has been a story out there for months. So what new there did the American people get that would cause him to say, I'm going to reevaluate what I thought about President Trump, good or bad? And I'm not certain there was much of that out there.
All right, well, let's say, so we've got the Russian collusion narrative, which is going to be told to us, I guess, at some point by Robert Mueller.
Right.
But what about this new avenue that Kim Strassel said the Democrats plan to open up on Trump's personal finances? Is that something that could get him into trouble?
Oh, I think so. And Kim talked about it with regard to the financing of the Moscow project. But there's also, we saw this in the committee hearing this week with the boss, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, asking about, well, did he inflate numbers or deflate numbers on insurance? On doing business with insurance companies. So we're going to see two different lines of thought here, I think. One is going to be, did he have any financial ties to the Russians based on the Trump-Moscow project? And a second one saying, let's go back and see, did he ever have problems with telling banks or insurance companies the wrong numbers, telling the banks that the properties were worth less than they were, or overstating his assets? I don't know what kind of a legal the vulnerability that would be, because I think it would depend upon the specifics that might be uncovered, and was it of a magnitude that would cause people to say this constituted fraud.
Well, and also I think the question would be, look, if this is something that happened before he was president, is that, and it's behavior unrelated to the presidency, is that a politically salient enough story to justify impeachment?
Right. Does it? I mean, the Constitution says high crimes and misdemeanors, which is not got a lot of definition around it.
Right.
So it's sort of like, you know, art. What's good art? I know it when I see it. What's a legitimate grounds for impeachment? I think we'll know it when we see it. But that's why the Democrats have to be very careful, because again, if this is done on a partisan basis, and if this is being driven by the shrill voices, some of which we saw this past week when Congresswoman Tlaib of Michigan goes after Mark Meadows in a deeply personal fashion, calls him a racist, says he's committed a racist act. That's exactly the kind of over-the-top behavior that causes a political party to be seen as unworthy of having power.
You wrote in your column for us this week that Robert Mueller, when he issues his report, if he doesn't indict people, he should not include in that details about people that might be critical if there is no decision to indict. Explain that.
Well, actually, slightly different than that. Robert Mueller is obligated to give a confidential report on all of his decisions to indict,
right,
and also all of his decisions not to indict. They're called declinations. It's up to the Attorney General, William Barr, to decide which of this he makes public. And my point was that the rules of the Department of Justice say you have to be sensitive to the privacy and reputational rights of people who are not charged. And I don't think it does the country a lot of good for the Attorney General to go into a lot of detail about, well, here are all the people that we decided not to charge, and here's how we decided not to charge them. The one exception would be is if they said, look, the president did something that is indictable, but since our Justice Department policy is not to indict a sitting president, this will have to wait until he leaves office. In that one instance, the Congress ought to receive that information so they can make a determination if it rises to high crimes and misdemeanors. But other than that, let's not repeat what Jim Comey did to Hillary Clinton and trash her reputation even after he decided not to indict her.
Okay, Carl, good advice, I think. Thanks for being here.